Isha Curry never imagined that words spoken with honesty would transform into the most intense storm her family had ever faced. It had been 3 weeks since her comments about Steph not being her type initially had spread like wildfire across social media, and the world didn't seem willing to forget or forgive. That Tuesday morning, she was sitting in the kitchen of her Atherton home, trying to prepare breakfast while her phone notifications wouldn't stop chiming. Each sound was like a needle prick, another cruel comment, another analysis of her marriage, another person questioning her love for Steph. Have you ever had your words distorted in such a way that you don't even recognize what you actually said? Isha was living exactly that nightmare, but on a global scale. "Mom," Riley, her oldest daughter, said, as she entered the kitchen with that worried expression no 12-year-old child should have, "there are people at school talking about you and Dad again." Isha's heart tightened. It was one thing to deal with adults on social media, but knowing this was affecting her children? That was unbearable. "What are they saying, sweetheart?" Isha asked, trying to keep her voice calm while inside she was falling apart. "They say you don't really love Dad, that you only married him because he became famous," Riley replied, and there were tears forming in her eyes. "That's not true, is it, Mom?" It was impossible not to feel how that moment broke something fundamental inside Isha. Not the anger from strangers, but the innocent confusion of her own daughter about the love between her parents. "Of course it's not true, my love," Isha said, pulling Riley into a tight hug. "I love your father more than words can express. Sometimes, when we try to explain how love grows and changes, people don't completely understand." But even while consoling Riley, Isha felt the crushing weight of knowing that her own words had created this confusion. Not intentionally. Never. Intentionally. But the impact was the same. Naturally, this leads us to a question that tormented Isha. How do you explain to the world that true love isn't about first impressions, but about final decisions? Social media was ruthless. Hashtags like Drak Isha Exposed and Poor Steph dominated the trends. Influencers created content analyzing every facial expression of Steph's in recent games, looking for signs of humiliation or sadness. Sports commentators debated whether the personal drama would affect his performance on the court. What hurt the most weren't the direct attacks on her. Isha had developed relatively thick skin over the years. It was the false narrative being constructed about her relationship with Steph, about the foundation of their family, about the love they had cultivated for more than a decade. "She never really loved him," said one comment with thousands of likes. "She settled, and now she's publicly resenting it." "Imagine finding out your wife always thought you weren't good enough," said another. "Steph deserves someone who chose him from day one," stated a third. You can see how people were completely rewriting Isha and Steph's love story, transforming growth into lack of love, evolution into betrayal. Steph, as always, was being the silent rock that his family needed. He didn't respond to comments, didn't defend himself publicly, didn't let the media circus visibly affect him. But Isha knew him too well not to notice the small signs. The way he checked his phone less frequently, how his smiles took a second longer to appear, how he hugged the children with a little more intensity. "Babe," he said that night, finding her staring at the laptop on the kitchen table, "you need to stop reading this." "I know," Isha replied, but couldn't close the screen. "It's just that, Steph, they're making it seem like I never loved you, that our entire marriage is a lie." Steph sat beside her, gently closed the laptop, and took her hands. He said, using the nickname only he used, "I know who you are. I know how you love me. I know the truth about our story. And at the end of the day, it's just us two who go to bed together, not them. Something that touches deeply is realizing how Steph was more worried about Isha's pain than about his own reputation. He saw the woman he loved suffering, and that bothered him more than any personal criticism. But Isha knew that silence, even being noble, sometimes isn't enough. Sometimes, to protect what you love, you need to fight for it publicly. Steph, she said, looking directly into his eyes, I need to speak. I need to explain what I really meant. I can't let this false narrative become the truth about us. Steph hesitated. He had always preferred to keep private life away from the spotlight, dealing with controversies through actions, not words. Are you sure? He asked. Once you speak publicly about this, there's no going back. And you know that, no matter what you say, some people will keep believing what they want to believe. I'm sure, Isha replied, and there was a determination in her voice that Steph recognized. It was the same determination she had when deciding to fight for her businesses, for her daughters, for anything that mattered to her. I won't let lies define our family. And it was in that moment that the idea was born of what would become one of the most moving and transformative speeches about relationships that the world had ever witnessed. Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist and relationship specialist that Isha had met through philanthropic work, called the next day with a proposal. Isha, she said, I know you're going through a difficult situation, and I have an idea. How about we transform this into something positive? I'm organizing an event about healthy relationships and communication in marriage. It would be an opportunity for you to speak your truth, but in a constructive way. The proposal was tempting, but frightening. It would mean exposing herself even more, being vulnerable on a stage, risking more criticism. How many people would be there? Isha asked. About 500 couples, plus the live stream. But Isha, it's not about the numbers. It's about the opportunity to transform misunderstandings into understanding. Isha was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. But if you decide to do this, I want you to know I'll be there supporting you. And I'm sure Steph will be too. That night, Isha could barely sleep. Her mind oscillated between the desire to hide until the storm passed and the burning need to fight for the truth about her love. At 3 a.m, she found Steph still awake in the kitchen, drinking tea, a habit he had developed when processing something important. Can't sleep either? She asked, sitting beside him. I was thinking about your decision, he admitted. And I want you to know, whatever you choose to do, I'll support you 100%. Even if it means more negative attention? Steph said, taking her hand. I married a brave woman who never backed down from a just fight. If you feel you need to speak, then you should speak. And I'll be there, in the front row, applauding every word. It was impossible not to notice how, even in the middle of the storm, the love between them not only remained intact, but seemed to be strengthening. The external criticism was revealing the solidity of the foundation they had built together. The next morning, Isha called Dr. Amanda Foster. I'll do it, she said, and her voice carried a determination that surprised even herself. I'll tell our true story. And so began the preparation for what would become not just a clarification speech, but a masterclass on how true love grows, evolves, and deepens over time. What Ayesha didn't know was that her words were about to touch not just Steph's heart, but the hearts of millions of people around the world who were also trying to understand the difference between immature love and love that withstands the test of time. And the journey to that moment of truth was just beginning. The next 7 days were the most intense of Ayesha Curry's life. Not because of the external criticism, although it continued arriving like relentless waves, but because of the internal journey she was taking to find the right words, the necessary courage, and the authentic vulnerability that this moment would require. It was Thursday morning when she first sat down with a blank notebook, trying to articulate feelings she had kept in her heart for more than a decade. How do you explain to the world that love isn't a switch you turn on during the first date, but a plant you cultivate every day? Ayesha began writing about Steph, not the famous Steph Curry, but the Steph who woke up before her to make coffee, who knew exactly how she liked her scrambled eggs, who still held her hand when they watched movies, even after 4 children and years of marriage. The man I love today, she wrote, is simultaneously the same 20-year-old boy I met in Los Angeles, and completely different. He grew. I grew. We grew together. Naturally, this leads us to a deep reflection. How many relationships fail because people expect love to remain exactly the same as it was on the first day, instead of celebrating how it evolves and deepens? Steph found Ayesha at the kitchen table that afternoon, surrounded by papers with drafts, some pages crumpled in the trash, others covered with corrections and rewrites. "How's it going?" he asked, gently massaging her tense shoulders. "It's harder than I imagined," Ayesha admitted. "How do you explain 15 years of love in one speech? How do you make people understand that when I said you weren't my type initially, that actually makes our story more beautiful, not less?" Steph sat beside her, picking up one of the drafts to read. "Young love is based on fantasy." He read aloud one of the phrases she had written. "Mature love is based on choice." "Hi, this is profound." "You think so?" she asked, clearly doubting herself. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just trying to justify myself." "No," Steph said firmly. "You're trying to educate. There's a huge difference." You can see how Steph wasn't just supporting Ayesha emotionally, but helping her understand the value of what she was trying to communicate. He saw that her speech could help other couples understand their own love journeys. That night, after the children went to bed, Steph and Ayesha had one of the deepest conversations of their marriage. Sitting on the living room couch, with only the soft light from the fireplace, they revisited their own story with an honesty that surprised even them. "Steph," Ayesha said, "can I ask you something? Do you remember what it was like when we met again in 2008? "Of course," he replied. "You were determined, focused on your career, a bit skeptical about, well, about everything. And didn't you find that frustrating? That I didn't fall in love instantly?" Steph thought for a moment before responding. "Actually, it was the opposite. The fact that you weren't just impressed with my rising career made me work harder to win you over as a person, not as a celebrity." Something that touches deeply is realizing how Ayesha's supposed initial rejection had forced Steph to connect with her on a deeper and more authentic level. "See," Ayesha said, scribbling furiously. "That's exactly what I need to explain. That initial resistance sometimes creates stronger connections, not weaker ones." They spent the next 3 hours reminiscing about specific moments from their journey. The first real date. The first time Ayesha realized she was falling in love. The moment Steph knew he wanted to marry her. How each challenge they faced together had strengthened their foundation. "Remember that fight we had about my training schedule during our honeymoon?" Steph asked, laughing. God, yes. Ayesha laughed too. I was so furious. I thought, I married a man obsessed with basketball who doesn't know how to turn off. And now? Now I understand that this dedication isn't just about basketball. It's who you are in everything, as a husband, as a father, as a person. Your excellence is complete, not selective. It was impossible not to notice how they were discovering that the characteristics that initially caused friction became the things they most loved about each other. Dr. Amanda Foster called on Friday to check how the preparation was going. Ayesha, she said, I want you to know there's no pressure for this to be perfect. The most powerful words usually come from the heart, not from a rehearsed script. I know, Ayesha replied, but I also know I only have one chance to get this right. If I mess up, if my words are misinterpreted again, then let's make sure. That doesn't happen, Dr. Foster said. How about we meet for a rehearsal? Just you, me, and Steph. A safe environment for you to practice being vulnerable. The rehearsal happened Sunday afternoon in the Currys' living room. Dr. Foster had brought a simple camera so Ayesha could get used to the feeling of speaking her deepest feelings while being recorded. Just start from your heart, Dr. Foster encouraged. Don't think about the audience yet. Just speak to Steph, as if you were alone. Ayesha Fahihai took a deep breath and began. When I was 17 years old, I created a rule for myself. No athletes. Not because I hated them, but because I was afraid of losing myself in someone whose entire life revolved around something I didn't completely understand. Her voice started trembling, but became steadier as she continued. What I didn't understand then is that true love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly on your checklist. It's about finding someone who makes you want to rewrite the entire list. Steph, sitting next to Dr. Foster, felt tears forming in his eyes. Even after so many years together, hearing Ayesha articulate her feelings this way moved him deeply. When Ayesha finished her improvised rehearsal, the silence in the room was reverential. Ayesha, Dr. Foster said softly, if you speak at the event with half the honesty you just demonstrated, you won't just clarify misunderstandings. You'll inspire people. That night, Ayesha felt more prepared, but also more nervous. There were only 2 days left until the event, and the magnitude of what she was about to do was starting to become real. Steph, she said, lying in bed beside him, what if I ruin everything? What if I say something wrong and things get even worse? Steph turned to her, took her face in his hands, and said something she would carry in her heart forever. You already won me over 15 years ago. Now you just need to win over the rest of the world. And trust me, when they see your heart the way I see it every day, it'll be impossible not to fall in love with who you really are. What's most impressive is how Steph was more confident about the reception of Ayesha's speech than she was herself. He knew the woman he married, and knew that her authenticity would be irresistible. On Monday, the eve of the event, Ayesha woke up with a clarity that surprised her. The butterflies in her stomach were still there, but there was something else. A sense of purpose. She was no longer trying to defend herself or justify her past words. She was about to share a truth about love that could help other people understand their own journeys. Ready? Steph asked, finding her in the kitchen that morning. Ready, she replied, and for the first time in weeks, her smile was completely genuine. What neither of them knew was that the speech Ayesha was about to give would not only change public perception about their relationship, but would become a landmark in the discussion about how true love really works. And in less than 24 hours, She would be on stage, about to speak words that would touch the hearts of millions. The Golden Gate Community Center had never received such an intense audience. 500 couples filled the auditorium, but the energy in the air suggested everyone knew they were about to witness something special. Cameras discreetly positioned would capture every word for the live stream that already had over 50,000 viewers online, before it even began. Backstage, Ayesha Curry adjusted the microphone with slightly trembling hands. She had chosen a simple and elegant blue dress, nothing that would distract from the message she was about to deliver. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel the pulse in her neck. "Deep breaths, love," Steph whispered, appearing beside her. He wore a dark gray suit and held her hand with that comforting firmness she had known for 15 years. "What if I forget everything I plan to say?" Ayesha asked, looking through the curtain at the expectant audience. "Then you speak from the heart," Steph replied simply, "like you always do." Have you ever been on the threshold of a moment you knew would change everything? Ayesha was exactly there, knowing that the next words she said would not only redefine public perception about her marriage, but possibly influence how thousands of people understood love. Dr. Amanda Foster approached with that encouraging smile that had become familiar. "Ayesha, are you ready?" she asked. "The audience is anxious to hear you." "As ready as I can be," Ayesha replied, taking one last deep breath. Steph kissed her forehead softly. "I'll be in the front row, reminding you how incredible you are every second." And then it was time. Dr. Foster walked to the stage first, helping to contextualize the moment for the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "relationships are journeys, not destinations. Today, we have the privilege of hearing about a real, honest, and deeply inspiring journey. Please welcome with warmth Ayesha Curry." Applause filled the auditorium as Ayesha walked to the center of the stage. For a moment, the lights blinded her slightly, but when her vision adjusted, she found Steph in the front row, smiling with that pride she recognized, the same pride he had when their daughters gave presentations at school. "Good afternoon," Ayesha began, and her voice, though slightly nervous, carried an authenticity that immediately captured everyone's attention. "My name is Ayesha Curry, and in the past few weeks, you've probably heard a lot about me. About things I said, about what it means for my marriage, about whether I really love my husband." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the environment. "I'm here today, not to defend myself, but to share a truth about love that I learned over 15 years beside the most extraordinary man I've ever known." It was impossible not to notice how Ayesha's posture had changed. The initial nervousness was giving way to the genuine conviction of someone who had an important message to transmit. "When I was 17 years old," she continued, "I created a rule for myself. No athletes. It was a rule born not from prejudice, but from fear. Fear of losing myself in a world I didn't understand. Fear of being just an accessory in someone's life." Ayesha could see people in the audience nodding, perhaps recognizing their own past insecurities. "What I didn't know then is that true love doesn't happen despite our fears. It happens when we find someone who helps us overcome them." Her voice began to get stronger, more confident. "I met Steph again when I was 20 years old. And you know what attracted me to him? It wasn't his growing fame. It wasn't his achievements. It was the way he listened to me when I talked about my dreams. How he encouraged me to pursue my own career. How he saw me not just as someone beautiful to have by his side, but as a complete partner." Naturally, this leads us to a powerful reflection. How many people confuse initial attraction with lasting love? Young love Ayesha said, and this would become one of the most quoted phrases from her speech, is based on fantasy. Mature love is based on choice. I choose Steph every day. Not because he fits perfectly on the list I created at 17, but because he makes me want to rewrite the entire list. The silence in the auditorium was profound, not of discomfort, but of people processing truths about their own relationships. I know some of you wonder, how can she say she didn't feel attracted to him initially if they have such a strong marriage? Ayesha continued, and there were tears beginning to form in her eyes. And I say, it was exactly that which made our love real. I didn't fall in love with a fantasy version of Steph. I fell in love with who he really is, discovering this day after day, year after year. Something that touches deeply is realizing how Ayesha was transforming what many saw as weakness in their relationship into its greatest strength. Steph taught me that love isn't about first impressions, she said, looking directly at him in the front row. It's about final decisions. It's about choosing to stay when it's difficult. It's about growing together instead of just aging together. Steph was clearly emotional, discreetly wiping away a tear. When I said he wasn't my type initially, I wasn't diminishing our love. I was explaining how our love grew beyond any type I could have imagined. Ayesha paused, breathed deeply, and then said the words that would become the heart of her speech. Great loves don't begin perfect. They become perfect, not through the absence of challenges, but through overcoming them together. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I apologize if my previous words caused confusion or pain, but I don't apologize for being honest about my journey, because it's this honesty that allows Steph and me to have the transparent and strong relationship we have today. Ayesha looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with as many people as possible. For the couples here present, I want you to know, there's no problem with not having fallen in love at first sight. There's no problem if your partner wasn't your type initially. What matters is if you choose each other today, tomorrow, and every day that follows. What's most impressive is how Ayesha had transformed her supposed embarrassing confession into universal matrimonial wisdom. Steph, she said, turning to look directly at him, thank you for showing me that true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfect for you. And you, my love, are perfect for me, in all the ways that really matter. It was at that moment that something happened that no one had planned. Steph got up from the front row, went up on stage, and hugged Ayesha while she was still speaking. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but was captured by all the cameras and would become one of the most shared images on social media that week. When they separated, Steph took the microphone for a moment. I just want to say one thing, he said, looking at the audience. This woman chooses me every day for 15 years, and I wake up every day grateful to have the opportunity to deserve her. And then something happened that surprised even Ayesha. The audience didn't just applaud. They stood up in an ovation that lasted more than 2 minutes. But the applause was just the beginning of the impact those words would have. In the moments immediately following the speech, something extraordinary happened in the auditorium. Couples who had arrived as spectators transformed into emotional participants in something much bigger than entertainment. They had witnessed a masterclass on vulnerability and authentic love. Nicole Martinez, a television producer who was in the audience, with her husband of 10 years, was one of the first to approach Ayesha after the event. Ayesha, she said, with tears still fresh in her eyes, I need to thank you. Your speech made me realize that I spent years feeling guilty because my husband wasn't what I'd dreamed of when I was a teenager. But you're right. He's perfect for who I became. This reaction repeated dozens of times that afternoon. Couple after couple approached to share how Ayesha's words had touched something deep in their own experiences. Tyler Brooks, a young entrepreneur who was there with his girlfriend Lauren Miller, said something that captured the general feeling. You didn't just save your marriage from public speculation. You taught us how to think about our own relationships more maturely. You can see how the speech had created a kind of collective catharsis. People who had never known each other were talking about their love journeys with an honesty that rarely happens in public. But the real impact began to manifest when the video of the speech went live that same night. Within 2 hours, clips from the speech had been shared more than 100,000 times on Twitter. But they weren't malicious shares or cruel memes. They were people genuinely inspired, sharing wisdom about relationships. The hashtag #JadichwaGreatLoves, inspired by Ayesha's most striking phrase, began trending worldwide, with couples sharing their own stories of how love had grown and evolved in their relationships. A young woman named Sarah Mitchell posted, "My husband was too much of a childhood friend for me initially. 8 years later, I can't imagine loving anyone more deeply." Great loves don't begin perfect. Connor Smith, a startup CEO, wrote, "Never thought about posting about relationships, but Ayesha Curry's speech made me reflect. My wife was too serious for me in the beginning. Now that seriousness is what I love most about her. We grew together." Great loves. It was impossible not to notice how the E2E speech had unleashed a global conversation about the difference between immature love and love that withstands the test of time. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had organized the event, was impressed with the reaction. In 20 years organizing relationship talks, she said to Ayesha the next day, "I've never seen such a universally positive and reflective response. You touched something people needed to hear." But perhaps the most significant impact happened where Ayesha least expected it, in the world of sports journalism. Amanda Foster, not the psychologist but sports journalist Amanda Foster, wrote an article that went viral. What Ayesha Curry taught us about real relationships versus fairy tale relationships. In the article she wrote, "For weeks, we criticized Ayesha Curry for admitting that Steph wasn't her type initially. But she taught us something profound. Relationships based on mutual growth are stronger than relationships based on first impressions." The article was republished in dozens of outlets and generated thousands of comments, most reflecting on how society romanticizes love at first sight, while devaluing love that develops over time. Naturally, this leads us to a powerful reflection. How many solid relationships are harmed by unrealistic expectations about how love should have begun? The most notable transformation happened on Steph and Ayesha's social media. The comments, which for weeks had been mostly critical, changed dramatically. "I owe an apology to Ayesha," wrote one user. "I criticized her for being honest about her journey. Now I realize she was sharing wisdom, not weakness." "Steph and Ayesha have the kind of love I want. Real, growing, based on daily choice," commented another. "Thank you for teaching us there's no problem with not having fallen in love at first sight." "My 12-year marriage proves you're right," said a third. What's most impressive is how the speech not only changed perception about the Currys' relationship, but elevated the conversation about relationships in general. Marcus Williams, from the Warriors marketing department, observed the phenomenon with professional admiration. "Ayesha," he said during a family meeting, "you transformed a public relations crisis into a cultural movement. That's genius, intentional or not. But for Ayesha, the most important impact was personal. Riley, her oldest daughter, approached her the morning after the speech. "Mom," she said, "the girls at school are talking about you again. But this time it's different. They're saying you're brave, and that you and Dad have the kind of love they want to have someday." Something that touches deeply is realizing how Ayesha had not only protected her family from criticism, but had become a positive example for her own daughter about what it means to be vulnerable with strength. 3 weeks after the speech, Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychologist, received more than 500 requests from couples wanting to participate in workshops about love that grows, a concept she decided to develop based on the ideas Ayesha had shared. "Ayesha," she said during a follow-up call, "you inspired a movement. Couples are seeking help not because their relationships are broken, but because they want to understand how to make their relationships grow like yours." Steph observed all this transformation with the silent pride that always characterized his support for Ayesha. "Babe," he said one night, finding her reading some of the thousands of positive comments that kept coming, "do you realize what you did? You didn't just save our reputation. You helped people understand love better." "I just spoke my truth," Ayesha replied. "And sometimes," Steph said, "that's exactly what the world needs to hear." 6 months later, Ayesha's speech had been watched more than 15 million times across various platforms. It was translated into 12 languages and used in marriage therapy courses around the world. More important than the numbers, however, were the real changes in people's lives. Hundreds of couples sent messages telling how Ayesha's words helped them reevaluate and strengthen their own relationships. One letter in particular deeply touched Ayesha. It was from a woman named Jennifer Walsh. "Dear Ayesha, 20 years ago, I married a man who wasn't my type in college. For 2 decades, I felt guilty about it, as if I was settling. Your speech made me realize I didn't settle. I grew. My husband and I renewed our vows last week, and for the first time, I feel complete pride in our journey." It was impossible not to notice how a courageous decision to be vulnerable in public had created waves of healing and understanding that extended far beyond anything Ayesha could have imagined. "You know what's the most beautiful part of all this?" Steph said to Ayesha on the first anniversary of the speech, as they revisited some of the comments and letters they had received. "What?" "You proved that honesty isn't weakness, and that real love isn't about perfection. It's about growth. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. When we have the courage to be vulnerable about our imperfect journeys, we create space for other people to do the same. And in that space of shared honesty, relationships don't just survive, they thrive. Great loves, as Ayesha had said, don't begin perfect. They become perfect through the courage to be real, vulnerable, and committed to mutual growth. And sometimes, when one person has enough courage to speak that truth publicly, she doesn't just save her own relationship, she teaches the entire world how to love better.